Okay, we want to talk about 5 essentials for successful ranch management. Now, these aren't things to do, they're your mental way of looking at the managerial problem. I'm not going to spend very much time on number 3, use of good planning and decision-making tools. I'm just going to say our computers and smartphones have really helped us with that to the extent they kind of make data nerds out of us. And I talked about that yesterday, so I won't repeat that today. But we do need some good information. I want to know what my wean calf crop percentage is. I want to know what my pregnancy rate is. I want to know what my death losses are by class of animal. I want to know how many animal days per acre I'm harvesting off land each year and each plot of land to see how I'm progressing that way. There's some things I want to know for sure that are going to help me make better decisions as I move forward. But first of all, the approach to your management should be both integrative and holistic. I hope I can define that a little bit in a way that makes sense. But to be integrative means to bring to one common whole. This this statement comes from Steve Covey. He introduced me to it years and years and years ago. But to be integrative, you bring to a common whole. And that means that we try to get good at as many things as we can. Animal breeding, animal reproduction, soil health, marketing, the list goes on. Become as good at those things as you can. Learn how to see, if I might say it this way, the individual pieces and then integrate them into one whole and make the best holistic decision for the whole operation. Okay. So for profitable decision making, I'm suggesting you become a systems thinker. For some of us, that's very difficult to do because we've been so entrenched in linear thinking since we started kindergarten. It's hard for us to break away from that and see symbiotic relationships and understand that 2 plus 2 doesn't just equal 4, it can equal a lot more than 4. And if we don't do things right, 2 plus 2 might only equal 3. So we need to get the idea that synergies happen and that there are no singular effects. We make one decision, and then there are compounding and cascading effects that balloon and get bigger and bigger. And if we make right decisions, they balloon in a very, very nice way. So we want to become integrative and holistic, and that means you're going to think, plan, execute, observe, and then you adjust or adapt holistically. Alan Savory would have said, then you replan at that stage. But think, plan, execute, observe, and good management, especially grazing management, is so observation dependent that we really need to observe and become very good observers. Okay. Essential number 2 of those 5 essentials is continuous improvement of the key resources: land, livestock, people. At the bottom, I've said you'd rather have assets that appreciate than depreciate. You notice I didn't say own. I said have. You do own some of the people's time, but you don't own the people. But land, livestock, and people. You might not own the land either. But if you can have all three of those, improving at the same time, it's very difficult to not become more and more profitable. And so that I want to really emphasize those 3 areas: improvement of the key resources. And for improvement of land and soil, I just love adaptive multi-paddock grazing. You might put other names to that, but regardless of the names, a lot of people don't understand what we're really talking about when we talk about what I would just simply call good grazing. They think they've got it, but too many of them don't. I would say, I don't know all the people we talked to yesterday, but too many people have never been there and done that some of you are taking grazing advice from. I read things about grazing that just are not right. And until you've been there and done it yourself and had the personal observations, it's really, really hard to understand what good grazing is. Uh, it's characterized by short graze periods followed by lengthy recovery periods. And short and long are different for each situation. That's season, rainfall, climate, plant regrowth rates, your objectives, etc. And that's why it's called adaptive. But short and long require careful definition. This is a picture taken in northeast Utah. Utah has two northeast corners. This is the northeast corner and the further west northeast corner, if I could describe it that way. Um, for those of you who are Westerners, it's not too far from Evanston, Wyoming, and not too far from Bear Lake, between Utah and Idaho. But anyway, it's been a year plus since this piece of ground was last grazed. You see, it's all nice and green, even amongst the sagebrush on the hillside. It's still green. It's just that time of year when it's going to be green. But to avoid grazing it, it needs a full year to recover. And a lot of people don't understand that yet. It does need a full year to recover. And to avoid grazing it at the same time next year as we're grazing it this year, I'm going to graze it more. We'll have more than a year recovery. Because the plants that wanted to grow at the time the cows are here now, I want them to be able to grow without being grazed next year at that same time. So it's going to be a year plus. Okay, see that cow eating thistle? It's interesting that Greg Simon was my predecessor here by a few years, but he kind of worked on training cows to eat thistle, sprayed a little molasses on some thistle, and now they just eat thistle. Once they learn they like thistle, they like thistle. Now, this area in the foreground, it didn't need a year plus recovery. It's just a riparian zone, be damp. You could fence that little area and graze it again, probably later in the same year and not do it any damage. But it's such a small area in relationship to the entire pasture, just weren't going to do that. Okay, here, 35 to 45 days since the last graze. Reason being, irrigation. Look at the color up here, not the same as the color down here. That is a canal or a big irrigation. It's going around and it goes around to the right and forms a U, and pretty soon it's behind where the picture is being taken. But it can be grazed again. You know when the next rainfall is going to be. It isn't going to be rainfall, it's flood irrigated, but you know when the next water is coming. And it's going to continue to grow. And you know in that part of the world, you're going to have sunshine almost every single day. So your recovery period doesn't have to be nearly as long to be effective. Continuous improvement of the land or adaptive grazing will improve the land. It'll improve the soil. And that results in increased carrying capacity, greater stocking rate, better animal performance, and animal performance in terms of fertility, herd fertility, growth rates, and health. Now, got to be careful here. It will improve the carrying capacity, but you don't want to let the stocking rate outrun the improvement in carrying capacity. Stocking rate's the demand, carrying capacity is the supply, and you must keep stocking rate within the context of your improvement in carrying capacity. If you overstock, you will overgraze. Can't avoid it. You either come back too soon or stay too long. You're going to have overgrazing one way or the other if you let the stocking rate outrun the carrying capacity. Now, there's 6 principles of soil health, and I don't have time to get into these in great depth, but you need to sort of understand them. And if you don't have these, get a photo shot of the screen or whatever you can do, but know your context. And then minimal disturbance. There's going to be some disturbance. Grazing itself is a disturbance. Frost in the summertime is a disturbance. There's a lot of things that are disturbances, but we're talking mostly about mechanical and chemical disturbances here. Cover on the armor or armor on the soil surface. as much diversity as you can encourage to be there, not only in plants, but in animals, insects, birds, wildlife, soil microbes, living and functional roots in the soil for as much of the year as possible. When it's really cold, how functional is that root? You know, in perennial plants, we got roots in the soil all year long. A lot of farmers, shoot, they kill the roots and they don't do anything to replace those roots, and they don't have roots in the soil hardly at all through the year. 90 days of a growing season or 100 days of a growing season, and then that's it. And that's why we advocate cover crops if you're going to farm, unless you're farming perennials. And so living functional root in the soil for as much of the year as possible. Then we want to integrate animals into cropping systems anytime that it's practical and possible, because soils will improve faster. Farmed soils will improve faster if we can integrate animals into that. They just bring another diversity in the biology that gets into the soil and helps the soil improve. And don't have time to say near all about that I could say. And then there are 3 rules of adaptive stewardship. The rule of compounding, which I've alluded to briefly, that there are no singular effects. And once you make the first managerial move, we do it expecting a certain result. And yes, if we did it right, we'll get that result, but more results, and it will compound and cascade forward. So it will get bigger and better as you go. And then the rule of disruption. Mother Nature provides some disruptions, but we need to provide some too. Disruptions create epigenetic effects in both the plants and the animals that enable, what's the word I want to use? They enable things to carry on, or for nature to withstand what the stresses that come their way. Anyway, they're just, the disruptions are important. We should introduce disruptions occasionally, and we can do it several ways. If you're grazing fairly intensively, you can change this, and doing it with temporary fences, you can change the size and shape of paddocks. You can change the recovery time, make it a little longer, a little shorter. There are a number of things you can do. And then diversity. And we just want to encourage all the diversity that we can encourage in our systems, in our farming systems, and in our grazing systems. The more diversity, the better. What happens is you feed diversity into the soil, and so depth of rooting can just go further and deeper and better, and more microbial activity in that soil just increases the rate of photosynthesis. And as you increase the rate of photosynthesis, carbon deposition gets into the soil, plants root deeper and deeper, and over time you just have a lot better result. So practices that are built on 6 principles of soil health and 3 rules of adaptive stewardship, which we've just reviewed. And I want to say the practices should obey the 6 principles of soil health or align with the 6 principles of soil health. And if they do, you're going to improve the effectiveness of the ecosystem processes, 4 ecosystem processes. Just as a humble, quick example, if I can keep the soil covered, which was principle number 1 or number 2, if I can keep the soil covered, have armor on the soil surface, we know, and research has shown, that water infiltration into the soil improves. Rather than hitting a bare piece of ground and almost immediately starting to run off, it starts to go into the soil. And then it's held in the soil. And temperatures moderate. If the soil is covered, the soil itself doesn't get as hot in the summer. Thus, microbial activity can be more efficient and better and last through a longer season. And it doesn't become as cold in the wintertime. The soil is covered. Thus, you can have an effective root in the soil for a longer period of the year. And just all those good things happen. Plants can grow earlier in the season, later in the season, because of that temperature moderation. Similar things happen in the others. Sunlight energy flow. You get more diversity, you have green leaves available through a longer portion of the year. And with green leaves being available in a longer portion of the year, you're feeding the soil microbes for a longer portion of the year, and productivity just increases. And we can go on and on in this, but today's probably not the time to do that. Okay, so we talk about, where I work at Understanding Ag, we talk about 634. The 6 principles of soil health, 3 rules of adaptive stewardship, and the 4 ecosystem processes and how those combine together. And we talk about those along with grazing management and farming practices. Now, a few quick examples. We're still on grazing. I'm going slower than I probably should, but Southeast Montana, this guy, he started out years ago, don't have time to tell his story, but it took 30 acres to run a cow. Today it takes him 16 acres to run a cow. So he says, I've doubled my carrying capacity because I'm not feeding as much hay in the wintertime, hardly feeding any hay in the wintertime, in fact. And the cows are a little bigger. So I've at least doubled. And he said, it cost me $50 an acre to do that. And as many acres as I have, that seemed like a horrendous amount of money. But he said, then I asked myself, where in Montana can I buy a ranch for $50 an acre? And I don't have to pay property tax on this ranch. It's just sitting right on top of the previous ranch. So that's pretty cool. Missouri, notice not a leaf on the tree yet. And look at the grass. First calf heifer is just about ready to calve. And I could tell all kinds of stories about these people too. But the point to make here, when they bought their farm, it took over 6 acres to run a cow-calf pair for a year. Today, it takes 1.9. That's pretty amazing, huh? And as I drove away from there, I thought, I'll bet the neighbors wonder how much fertilizer Steve had to put on that ground to make grow grass like that. And I can guarantee the only fertilizer that gets is what comes out of the back end of those cows. So pretty marvelous thing. I could tell you a lot more story about that, but today's not the time. Now, in all of this, in your grazing, a man should look for what is and not for what he thinks should be. We get an impression of where we think we're going, and we need to be very careful in our observation that we don't delude ourselves. Delude, not dilute, but into thinking that we're making more progress than we are. We know where we want it to go. So when we observe, let's observe with the best accuracy that we possibly can. And then the next statement there, because the parts of a system are interacting, behavior of a particular part, when included in a whole system, may not be what is expected based on the behavior it would exhibit in isolation. And that's important. Oftentimes you see monocultures planted at test trials. One cultivar, another cultivar, another cultivar. And then if they mix all those together and plant them in one plot, the productivity is amazingly different. So a plant that you may like and might, when planted by itself, did really well, it might not do that well when included in a polyculture. Just need to remember that. Doesn't mean it won't work, doesn't mean it's not important, but we need to understand the plants don't, and the animals too, don't interact the same in isolation, in a group as they do in isolation. Mississippi. I don't know how many have taken the opportunity to see the film Roots So Deep. You can see the devil down there. And kind of the stars in the last segment of that, Cooper and Katie Hurst. This is their property. And these are cover crops. They're south of the fescue belt. So to have grain feed in the wintertime, and he switched from covers, from doing a lot of tillage and stuff, and quit doing that, just planted cover crops and no more tillage and planting rye and fertilizing. And he reduced his costs by 2/3. 2/3 of his costs disappeared. You could almost make your salad out of that, couldn't you? But just wonderful feed. Wyoming, this is a ranch that I work with in Wyoming. You can kind of see some mosaics here. He was placing those cattle, a bunch of yearlings, for winter grazing. Placing, he's become very, very good at animal handling, and he places them. He's not to where he needs to be with his fencing, and he's pretty good with stock water development, so he can use the water and move water from place to place a little bit to move the cattle, but he's placing the cattle with pretty darn good results. And I can tell more about that if people want to ask questions about it. Again, examples of where he's placing them. Now, here is an example. Same ranch. On the left-hand side was grazed late the previous summer. Across the fence to the right, it wasn't grazed at all the previous year because it wanted to be a turnout pasture this year. And I shouldn't say turnout because I never turned in. The cattle were always out, but they were there early. And you see, if I'm going to graze during the early part of the growing season, I want to have standing stockpile from last year to be grazing as green up occurs. They won't get the squirts and the runs like they do if they're just on green grass. They might for a day or two because they love it, but when they pretty soon know that makes them a little uncomfortable, and they recognize pretty soon that if I'm eating some of that old dry with that new green, I sure feel a lot better. And thus you can kind of tell what's happened there. So the new green, they're grazing it. You can tell it's not as robust as it is here to the left, but they had the old stuff to work with it. This is just a tank like a chicken water, and it's portable. He can pick it up and move it. And they've had a lot of coal bed methane work there, so they can get water in a lot of places. They don't yet have permanent tanks put on the lines. Plus, they kind of like the flexibility of using this where they want. They will have two of these and leapfrog them in a large pasture that's not cross-fenced yet or subdivided in any way. And thus they can move the cattle and have them not as tightly rotated as you might like, but pretty darn well rotated by turning on the new water. As the cattle move to that, then they shut this one off and they can leapfrog it again. They just leapfrog across the pasture with these drinkers. Now, for continuous improvement of livestock, it begins with cows selected for this. Speaking in Georgia, they said, "We don't have this in Georgia. What are you talking about?" I said, "No, but you've got 2 to 4 months in a year that are really the toughest for your cattle. Select cattle that fit that. This is a slough bottom that in the summer is never dry, couldn't be hayed. Matter of fact, those cattle are walking on ice. It just happens to be covered with snow and grass and that sort of thing, but it's all icy underneath. But look at the condition. Now, picture taken in January, end of January. If those cows were going to be calving in February, do you think you could get away with making them eat that kind of stuff in January? Can't do it. So select cows for that, then cull the right cow. I hope y'all cull all the cows on that list. Ugly, you can define ugly, but certainly a bad udder, terrible udder, blindness, they're kind of ugly. And then pretty soon you get them culled well enough and you got a good enough herd, you can start to cull on marketability. Is that going to be pleasing to the buyer? And does she kind of make the whole group look kind of out of place? And then select the right bulls. Don't undo what cow culling is attempting to do. I don't mean to be critical of the people who produce your seed stock for you, but I would be willing to almost bet that most of you buying bulls are bringing back to your herd the very problems that your cow culling is trying to eliminate from your herd. Because your seed stock provider is not culling cows the same way you are to have cows that truly fit your environment. And then, I get so aggravated almost every fall, you start seeing articles in the popular press telling you how to take care of your bulls so they can get cows pregnant next summer. And I'm saying, hey, if I've got to pamper that bull so he can get cows pregnant next summer, do I ever want to keep his daughters as replacement cows? And my answer to that question is no. Basically, we raised most of our own bulls, but they uh, they were the last things we fed if something had to be fed. We fed them a little protein in the winter so they could graze grass and digest it, but they were the last things we would haul feed to. Wyoming in May, these heifers, they grazed like you well, they were on their cows until January or February. And then they were grazing where I was showing that my nephew actually had placed those cattle in slides a few minutes ago. Here are the same heifers, and I should have got better close-ups on these, but you can see body condition's pretty good. Pretty good. And here's a heifer that's got that solo cup shape that Steve talked to us about yesterday. Again, not grazed in the previous year, but now about calving time, the new green's coming. You can see it, so the cow's going to have a good diet, but it's a mid stockpile from the previous year, which I just love. By the way, these heifers we had out of 240 some, we had 6 a little bit late bred and 3 opens. And they had hardly ever eaten hay in their life except for maybe a 10-15 day period around the time that they were weaned. And other than that, hadn't had hay in their life. Yet look at the condition. Okay, now we need to jump to people. Continuous improvement of people, and I don't have much time. I could give a week's presentation on this, but begins with the manager's job, which is to create an environment in which people want to excel. Step one, create an environment in which people want to excel. That's not always easy. Provide the tools, training, and freedom to do it. Talked about that some yesterday. Leadership is best gauged by the voluntary response of those being led. Not voluntary, it's not leadership. And leadership is not about being in charge. It's about taking care of those in your charge. And then just remember, most people don't quit their job, they quit their boss. As you want to evaluate your managerial skills, your leadership skills, you need to remember this last statement. And self-assess with honesty and accuracy. Now, major determinants of profit. I want you to notice that weaning weight is not on this list. Jim Garris talked about this some yesterday, very accurately. Weaning weight always comes with a cost. I'm not going to say that there aren't times that cost won't pay, but a lot of times it won't. And a lot of times it's a negative. And a lot of times the cost comes in the fact that you've let the cow get bigger and bigger, so now you have to run fewer of them and have less calves to wean. We saw the graph earlier on that shows that effect. So, you know, weaning weight comes with a cost, and we just have to recognize that. It doesn't fit on this list at all because it's not nearly as important as the items on the list. Enterprise mix and choices. We talked about that yesterday in the panel discussion, so we won't go any more into that. But cattle are probably kind of low on the totem pole in actuality for profitability for species type. And then within cattle, you got stocker, you got terminal operator that buys all replacement cows and sells and sells all the calves, or you've got the maternal breeder. And I could talk more about that, but I won't. Stocking rate, huge driver of profitability. It's dependent on cow size and milk production. Smaller cows giving less milk, you can run more of them, significantly more of them. And we get so caught away up in milk. Milk is anti-maternal as far as I'm concerned. Calves need a certain amount of milk to get going in life. But once they have that much milk, the conversion of grass to milk to pounds of calf is a terrible conversion. Calf needs to get early in life, start drinking a little water beside mama, eating a little grass beside mama, and starting a slow process of converting into a functional ruminant. Then fed feed versus graze feed, huge. If I don't have to feed cows and they can feed themselves, it is just so much more profitable. Calving season. Calving season can enable some of these above. Uh, Facilitate stocking rate improvements, can facilitate changing the ratio of fed feed to graze feed, but calving season is extremely important. Can reduce overheads, the amount of help that's required at calving time. Don't even need buildings. Uh, Realized herd fertility. How fertile is my herd? We'd like them to. We'd like every cow to conceive. We'd like every cow to wean a calf. That won't happen. But as we move toward that, we just have more units to sell as herd fertility improves. More units to sell as herd fertility improves. And wise input use for optimum production. I'm just saying, ask for at least a 2-for-1. In other words, somebody's trying to sell you a feed supplement. You want to know that you could get $2 back for every dollar you spend. People will say, why? Shouldn't have to do that to be profitable. Yeah, but what if you misjudged or you let the feed salesman mislead you a little bit? They'll want to sell you plenty of feed. I want to know that I can be 2-for-1. And then what if the price of that feed supplement should increase? And now my cattle are addicted to it. And I use the term addicted loosely, but they kind of become addicted to it. In other words, their production is dependent now on that feed source. And if the price goes up and now I can no longer afford it, what's going to happen to my production after that? And then marketing is just so terrifically important. And then we have to wage war on cost. And why? It's because of competition. People don't have to eat meat. Probably going to die young if they don't. But if they do eat meat, it doesn't have to be beef. And I don't want to spend a life on chicken. I eat a little because some of the people preparing food for me like chicken, and so I go ahead and eat it. And it's okay, but I sure prefer beef. But that's not common through our business. People don't have to eat our product. So again, we just have to produce at a cost that is profitable to us and attractive to our customer. So now we're working on cost, become effective and efficient. Look at these cows grazing out there on that in the wintertime. Body condition okay? I'd call it okay. So you match your cow size and calving season to the available resources, and that matching has an effect on these items here down in the lower right-hand corner. Has effect on every one of them. And those in turn have an effect on your profit, and a marvelous effect on your profit. So I want to increase grazing days and reduce feeding days. Just the objective. Now to do that, I've got to feed a little protein, and if it's close by, I just love alfalfa hay as a protein supplement. 3 to 5 pounds a day will generally cover the protein need easily, but only present it 2 or 3 days in a week. So in other words, if I want the cow to have 3 pounds a day, 7 times 3, 7 days in a week, times 3 is 21 pounds. I'm only going to go 3 times, so I feed 7 pounds each time I go. Skip 1 day, skip 1 day, skip 2. The cattle can't schedule that. And so they won't wait at the gate for you. And see, I got after these guys after they showed me this picture, because see where those cows are out there? Which cows are going to get the most alfalfa? These right here or those out there? I wanted to be as close to even as I can get it. So they're supposed to pull in there, wait for the cows to come to them, because the cows can't schedule. Skip a day, skip a day, skip 2. So they're not going to start to come till they hear the feed outfit. So let them hear the feed outfit, wait for them to get there before you start kicking hay off. And it's still not going to be as even as you'd like, but tell your driver to drive as fast as he can without shaking you or the hay off of the hay rack, and get as many cattle there as you can. Once every cow's head's in the hay, then take your merry time to put the rest of it out. Okay, but they'll eat it, and you can see where they were yesterday, and it's amazing how much of that yucky stuff, just slew grass, they will eat and maintain body condition. Now we need to place our emphasis on marketing. Production and marketing must work together. There's two ideas to me. After you cut your inputs, you cull the cows, you cull after cutting inputs, and after you cut inputs, you'll have to cull some cows. But heifers, I want a short exposure to a lot of heifers. In other words, Wally Olson was spot on. Every heifer calf is part of your cow herd. She's part of your cow enterprise. Breed them all. I mean, there might be a few dogs that you have to take off, but breed them all, expose them all, but for a short period of time. The opens make good feeders and the pregnant ones make good cows. And then the cows, I want a short calving season and a long breeding season. And you say, what? How do you do that? Well, I just leave the bulls with the cows until preg check time. This one example. There's other ways I've done this, but leave the bulls with the cows until preg check time. And when you preg check the cows, these cows were set up for April calving. So we'd preg check and we would say, okay, if the pregnancy occurred after, in other words, if she's going to, how do we do it? If the pregnancy occurred, I got to get the dates right, after the 1st of September, she'd be a June or July. You call her open, even though you can palpate some pregnancies there. But pregnancies that bulls came out the same day they were preg checked. So pregnancies that occurred yesterday or even last week, you can't check. So if she was pregnant after the 1st of September, she's open. On our book, she's open. Our pregnancy rate say that she was open. They call her an open cow. Okay. And then we preg them in December. And I had a buyer that would come and buy those June, July calver cows, pregnant June, July calving cows at a nice premium. And that really, really worked nicely. Now the next spring came and they were ready to set up to calve in April. At the last day in April, first day in May, we moved away all the cows that hadn't calved and put them in a single herd. This was a large ranch, a lot of cows, so we still have 500-600 cows in that May calving herd, and we bred them for May, and we had a guy that would buy them off the end of the preg chute that fall after we'd weaned the calf. We had the calf to sell ourselves. He'd buy the pregnant cow again at a nice premium, bred to calve in May, which was his calving season. So just a really nifty and nice marketing thing. And the thing I would want to add is that for a maternal operation to compete with a terminal operation, terminal meaning they buy replacement cows and sell all the calves every year. And yeah, the cows might not be as good as if you'd raised them, but the only way the maternal one competes is if they can produce replacement heifers at a very low cost and sell bred cows at a nice premium. I've managed both types of ranches in the same system and charged that premium price, moving them from the maternal to the terminal. And it was hard for the maternal to beat the terminal. Matter of fact, it never did. It could run neck and neck if you had low development costs. So the results of all this are appropriate cow size and a higher stocking rate. You'll have profitable open heifers. Our open heifers were profitable every year because minimal inputs to develop them. Didn't cost a lot of money to develop their replacement heifer. Less fed feed, more grazing, drought planning flexibility, market opportunities for bred cows, and increased profitability. Two charts. Either put them in your mind or take a picture. It's taken me many mentors, lots of experience, lots of observation, lots of records on costs and profitability to learn what I'm going to show you in these next two slides. Your advantage is that you can learn it a whole lot faster because of those of us who've plowed the ground before. Adapted cows, adapted to your environment, your management. Remember, to the cow, it's not just your environment, it's what you add to it as the manager. So adapted cows, adapted to your management, your environment. The best calving season you think you can have it be for your environment, and grazing management. Those three things work in tandem. They work with each other. Chances are if you change one a little, you've changed the other, and vice versa. And then they have an effect on these items here in the lower right-hand corner, and a tremendous effect, I might add. to soil health, to your carrying capacity, to fed feed versus grazed feed, to overheads, particularly labor and facilities at calving in and around calving time, and herd fertility. Well, they have an effect on overheads too, because you quit haying. Or if you do hay, you have somebody else come do it for you so you don't have to have any of that equipment. There are just all kinds of things that can happen there. And then the herd fertility, as everything matches up, the herd fertility gets just really, really good. So that slide, and then this one. Reduce overheads. We talked about it already. Achieve excellent herd fertility. And if you cull the right cow, the cows that I had on that list, always, any open cow, any dry cow. The dry cow costs you a lot more than the open cow. So cull them both. And then the rest of them. If you have to doctor a cow, you'd like to get to where you can cull those cows. If you have to pull a calf from a cow, cull that cow. Just be tough on the culling. And after you're tough on it for a few years, you don't have to be near as tough on it later on, because there just aren't as many of them, of the misfits that you have to cull. And then you improve and market well, and then improve 3 key ratios: acres per cow, cows per FTE, and fed feed versus graze feed. Those ratios are powerful, powerful, powerful economically. Fewer acres per cow, more cows per full-time equivalent of labor, and fed feed versus grazed feed. And Jim Garish, in different words, emphasized those 3 ratios yesterday as well. And when you start analyzing profitability, that's just where it comes from. So if your daily efforts can move toward what you've seen in these last 2 slides, this one and this one, if your daily efforts can work toward making improvement in those areas, you will be more profitable. And then when you are profitable, you can spend your profit however you want. Now, with prices as high as they are today, I would be building a cash reserves and reducing debt as fast and as furious as I possibly could. But if you're in the typical years that we have in the cattle business, hey, and you can be profitable. You can be profitable in the bad years, which I hope you can, and you should be able to become that way. If you can be profitable in the bad years, drought, bad market, etc., if you can be profitable in those years, spend your profit however you'd like. You can buy another saddle horse or 2 when you didn't need them, so that when the grandkids come out to visit, you can take them for a horseback ride. Have another 4-wheeler. Same reason, or side by side, so when the grandkids come, you can take them around the ranch. Do a little updating in your kitchen at home. Make your house a little more pleasant. Spend the profit however you would like, and you'll all have different interests in what you want to do for your quality of life as you spend your profit. But if you don't have a profit to spend, it just puts you in a horrific situation. It's hard to do anything good if you're not profitable. And that's why I place such an emphasis on profitability. And soil health is the biggest driver, seriously, the biggest driver of profitability. If you can improve your soil health, your range productivity, everything else is going to improve and just get better. I think that winds it up, Jared.
Well, that's amazing. That's amazing. Way to be direct, cover the subject, and I am sure there are lots of questions. Somebody commented in the chat like they can't write fast enough. This will be recorded. Go back and review the recording. There's lots of other recordings of Burke on YouTube. So we appreciate you, Burke, being part of this, part of the lineup of speakers today, specifically for being our keynote speaker and for just disseminating some of your wisdom and knowledge that you've gained over the last, how many decades of management has it been?
Oh, gosh. Management. I became a general manager in the early 70s, and I was young, and the people that hired me in that position probably should not have, based on what they could see on my resume, but they did. And I've just got to say, thanks to a bunch of mentors early in my life, other good ranchers that I've gone and visited, and they've been free with their time and free with sharing their information and knowledge and understanding. I am not an originator of very many new ideas. I
Mhm.
think the thing I have perhaps been blessed with is to take all those bits and pieces and to pull them together and look at them holistically and to see the whole part. And so my arrangement of the ideas is probably different and unique to me, but boy, I would never have gotten there without all this other input from many, many good and wonderful people.
Amen. Yep, I feel the same way. You are here representing Understanding Ag, and can you let people know what the best next step for them would be if they want to learn more from you, the principles that you've taught about, and engage with Understanding Ag?
Well, we do have a consulting services available, but we also have what we call the soil health academies, and we have different ones of those. Some emphasize cropping, some emphasize grazing, and we even have one on docket now that emphasizing wildlife. And I would suggest those as a first step. Uh, I I'm probably biased, but I think we are the best at soil health of the people out there. We just have a cadre of consultants that really have learned soils and soil health and the understanding of that. And again, I think soil health is foundational to everything else. So I would say if I were to take the first step, I would suggest one of our academies.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been to a couple of their classes. They're always top notch. It's neat that you can choose whether you want to have the livestock emphasis or the crop emphasis, and it can be taught in your context. So again, Burke, thank you so very much. Let's share some takeaways from Burke's presentation. One or two key things that you've honed in on that you feel like, hey, this spoke to me because I was here today. Here's the action steps that I can take. Remember the acronym FAST yesterday. Forget what we've already learned. Be active in our learning, change our physiological state, and learn to teach. If you do that, you'll get the most out of this presentation and the subsequent one. So thank you so much, Burke.